Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate everybody showing up here, and thank you guys for flying in for this. So today I'm going to open up with some disclosures. We are all friends, in as much as some of us are also competitors. But wanted to give you guys a heads up. We're not going to be covering the absolute basics of liquid staking. We're going to get into some of the meaty and more delicious topics. And one other set of disclosures is that I invested into the Lido Treasury Diversification round and also into the Alluvial most recent round. And so I have a bit of vested interest in both, and I want to disclose that.
It's not a conflict if you have interest in everything.
That's right. That's right. So to start off, could you please both introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your projects?
OK. Hey, everyone. I'm Izzy. I'm a contributor to Lido DAO as the master of validators. Lido is a decentralized liquid staking protocol headquartered on Ethereum. It's present on Ethereum, Solana, and Polygon currently. And basically, it's a two-sided coordination protocol for stakers, people that want to hold liquid staking tokens, and node operators who want to run validators as a part of the protocol.
Awesome. I'm Schmiedt. I'm the CEO of Alluvial. We're the development company behind the Liquid Collective Protocol, focused on providing enterprise-grade liquid staking to participants in the market, particularly through the issuance of receipts on staked positions that we're able to offer to enterprises, exchanges, custodians, and other players in the market.
Awesome. And this is going to be the only basic question that we're going to be asking. But can you guys tell us just a TLDR of liquid staking? Why is it useful? How is it being used today? And what is its role in on-chain use cases like DeFi?
I'll keep it super duper simple. You can think of liquid staking as basically a technology solution that allows the issuance of receipts. So a proof that you've basically staked your tokens on Ethereum or other blockchains. It's a really interesting use case because if you think about it, it's actually a pretty basic primitive. It's basically a title of ownership that you can prove on chain and build things around or on top of. I think a lot of the early adoption that we've seen in the market and around this primitive has been in DeFi. I'm sure Izzy will talk a little bit more about that, but I'm super excited for us to get into some of the future use cases that we're enabling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the main use cases of liquid staking tokens as opposed to native staking is liquidity, i.e. you can move the capital around. Also, it's unlocked, so you don't necessarily have to go through the bonding and unbonding periods, which may be dynamic in certain networks and up to weeks long. And the most important thing is that basically it turns an asset which may normally be non-productive in an ecosystem into a productive asset. So if you have ETH underpinning all of DeFi, for example, why would you not want something like ETH++ underpinning all of DeFi? Something that on its own increases in value and at the same time secures the whole network that is creating this new marketplace of financial disintermediation.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, over the last, I would say maybe like year or two, we've seen more and more of a change in the proportion of liquid staking tokens that are ETH being used in DeFi relative to regular ETH that is not being staked. And so that proportion of liquid staking tokens continues to increase, which bodes well for the DeFi narrative. And then Mara, you talked a little bit about what some of the future use cases are going to look like, which coincidentally is in fact my next question. So can you tell us a little bit, both of you, how the liquid staking market will evolve in the coming years? Specifically, how will the use cases, the user profiles, distribution channels, and so on be different from what they are today?
Yeah, happy to touch on it. I think you pointed to something really interesting, which is the general market trend that we've seen over, call it, the last 18 or so months. When you think about the relative market share of traditional staking relative to liquid staking, we're noticing a pretty consistent trend that liquid staking is just garnering more and more adoption in the market. I think the value proposition, no matter what type of user you are, is very clear. As Izzy mentioned, of course, being able to stake, an asset or a token on a blockchain, providing security to the network, but then having a receipt that you can basically move around in the market, leverage as collateral, it becomes a lot closer to what we see in traditional markets. We use receipts in all kinds of activities today, including, the commodities trading world, for example, that a lot of use cases build on top of. Aside from just the general adoption trend, I think one thing that's been really interesting is when you think about some of these innovations, a lot of the early, adoption, if you will, has really come from crypto power users. And so when you think back to, December of 2020, when Ethereum, launched proof of stake for the first time, a lot of the early adopters that were really supporting staking in the market were, truthfully, crypto native retail users that really wanted to see what else they could do with their staked Ethereum. And I think, Lido has done an amazing job, capturing that market and the demand that we saw in that kind of, crypto native retail segment. I think as we think about the future and kind of going back to some of the more like traditional use cases that we see in the traditional markets, today when you think about a trade financing transaction or just general commodities trading, receipts that you get, in the context of, when you're trading corn, for example, or when you're trading gold, you basically leverage receipts that you might have in warehouse storage, and you do that pretty consistently to support a trade finance transaction or to leverage that as collateral for other transactions that you might enable. And so in the digital commodities market, when you think about Ethereum in that way, these types of receipts start unlocking a lot of interesting use cases in the traditional world. And so what's really interesting for us as a project that is predominantly focused on supporting institutional grade and enterprise grade adoption of this technology, it's really enabling, things like structured products, the enablement of, the derivatives market, enabling, exchanges and custodians and other players in the market to really offer this at scale. And so things that we're starting to see in that realm are things like, hedge funds trying to think about putting on market neutral trades, providing access to, staking rewards, for example, through these types of solutions. We're starting to see a lot of movement now in the structured product space. It's obviously a very big topic of conversations as we start seeing, ETFs emerge as something that becomes really interesting in the market. Well, guess what? Those players are going to need to fulfill certain redemption periods, certain liquidity needs. And this type of product is actually really, really well positioned to enable them to, both provide security to the networks that they run on top of, but also offer a really compelling product that is able to fill, redemption periods and, the right time frame. And so that's really how we think about the market. It's like everything in crypto, moving from crypto native power users that are mostly on the retail side to slowly activating sort of enterprise and institutional segments with the right products and solutions that are designed to meet their needs.
That was really great. I probably don't have much to add, but I will add something anyway. So I think the other kind of like core precept to keep in mind here, and we can harken back to the presentation that Arthur Hayes gave a little bit earlier today, is that staked assets, and especially liquid staked assets, are like de facto also resistant to the inherent inflation that might be applicable to most staking networks. Now on Ethereum it's a little bit different because there's also the burn, so there might be deflationary supply periods and inflationary. But of course if the asset that you're using to both secure the network and transact on the network and hold your capital as value in is gaining rewards at the same rate that of the block issuance and the inflation of the network, it's not only a natural hedge against the inflation of the network itself, but also of inflation of assets outside of the network. So when you're contending with things like raising rates in the TradFi world or inflation of stablecoins, being able to use assets that have this built-in hedge, especially as, for example, as collateral in order to mint stables, is something that really unlocks further power and capital. And the biggest kind of driver or vector for any of this kind of demand is going to be utility. And the utility of liquid staking tokens primarily comes from their liquidity, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think something you guys both kind of touched on is just the financial instrument side of things. But Mara, you in particular also touched on like the ETF and ETP space. You talked a little bit about redemption periods, stuff like that. Would you mind kind of explaining both of you guys or one of you to the audience why is it that liquid stake ETH tokens are so pivotal to what can make an ETF or an ETP successful. Try to explain it in simple language, of course, but I think that's like one of the nuances that people aren't really grokking, but I think it's going to be incredibly important as these products are getting developed.
You want to take this one?
Sure. Can definitely elaborate on the ETF and ETP space in particular, but the reasoning or with the value proposition is actually pretty simple. If you're building any type of product or solution that depends on capital efficiency and being able to, for example, fulfill redemptions in the structured product world, or be able to facilitate the trading in and out of positions, or at least even create the certainty that if and when you can come out of a stake position on Ethereum or any other network, receipt tokens or liquid staking in general is going to be pretty instrumental to facilitating that. If you think about the market today, staking is really a one-way street. And so there's only so much you can build on top of around it that is going to be able to mature the market and really create, interesting solutions that are going to be really important for us to, build for, mainstream adoption. And in the liquid staking context, we start unlocking a lot of these use cases where, Izzy spoke about, effectively like stablecoin issuances or other types of fixed yield instruments. We are starting to see a lot of appetite or interest where institutional players might have a particular requirement from regulators or for compliance purposes to fulfill certain redemption periods. And in the ETP and ETF space, that's pretty much a mandate. And so when you think about receipt tokens or liquid staking solutions in that context, it starts becoming really interesting what we can build on top of this market.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, unless you're taking, and this is just my initial thoughts, but unless you're taking, an LST approach to the creation of these products, what you'd essentially need to do is even if you're staking most of the ETH, you're going to have like a fairly large portion of it that remains unstaked because you want to be able to honor these withdrawal requests.
Yeah, or you're going to want to constantly cycle it, which puts a drag on your rewards and also a drag on the network itself, right? And you don't want to do that. It can actively harm the network if you're sitting there pumping ETH through the queue the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So we're going to move on to a spicier topic. As some of you may know, Lido has been getting some heat recently about approaching 33% of staked ETH on Ethereum.
Again.
They've been flirting with this limit for about a year and a half now, but they're getting very, very close. And so I'd love to explore that topic. There's a couple of questions that we'll be walking through. The first one is is it a problem? And if not, why not? And then we're going to talk about some of the other liquid staking projects and why they haven't been able to really challenge Lido's dominance. And then talk a little bit about Alluvial and the approach you guys are taking and how that might give you a little bit of a different strategy. So you want to take the first one?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to provide a little bit of background here because unfortunately this is a nuanced topic which a lot of times gets lost on the Twitter pulpit, but we'll do what we can to elucidate it here. So a lot of times we say Lido this or Lido that. In essence, Lido is actually two separate things. There is the Lido protocol. That is a collection of software that runs on Ethereum. It is a middleware that users use to interact with each other with regards to liquid staking tokens. And there's two types of users in this protocol. There's stakers, so people that take ETH and get receipt tokens in return for that, which is the liquid staked ETH. And there's node operators that run the validators. So the Lido protocol currently has a node operator set which is permissioned, which means that node operators are selected by the Lido DAO. The Lido DAO is a purely on-chain organization headquartered in Ethereum. It does not have a legal entity wrapping it. And this DAO has LDO holders, who are basically the people that get to make the decisions around which node operators are on board and when, but not how much stake they get. That is actually determined by the on-chain protocol code, and so there's like a fair stake distribution mechanism. Currently, there are 31 operators. So if you think about the fact that there's 31% of stake running through the Lido protocol and 31 operators, each operator has, on average, if you do like very basic math, a little bit more than 1% of stake share running through that operator. And because of the staking mechanism, basically this stake always gets well distributed over time. It doesn't happen like in a week, which does quite a lot to distribute not only the stake itself, but also the risk and potential impact of something going wrong with one operator or one type of setup to minimize possible risk to the network. you see a lot of other operators on the Ethereum network that run much less than 30 or 33% in aggregate, but it's actually only like one company, right? Or one legal entity behind it that has contracts perhaps with several node operators, but is ultimately one inflection point, let's say, from a regulatory or a jurisdictional perspective with regards to ways that the network can be attacked. So there are legitimate concerns around tail risks that are entailed by certain protocols, and especially if there are like single entities, single business entities or single operators controlling over a certain amount of share of Ethereum. These inflection points are at 33%, at 67%, and like arguably at 100%, where if all ETH is staked, I don't think there's enough ETH to pay for gas, but we can figure that out later. So at 33%, the attack that somebody could do on the network is actually a bit nonsensical. What you can do is refuse to finalize the network, i.e. stop participating. If you do that, what'll happen is that the network will go into like non-finality mode, and validators will enter a state where they get more heavily penalized the longer this happens, and you will start losing the ETH that is collateral against these validators. So the only reason to do that would be to like dynamically denial of service attack the network, and you would need to get, as the Lido protocol currently is, all node operators on board to do this at the same time. So there are node operators that participate on the Lido protocol that are Ethereum client dev teams. The selection process isn't arbitrary. It looks for entities that are aligned with the ethos and the values of the Ethereum ecosystem. And it makes sure that not only do they have voices, but they have the ability to like say no to what might be dangerous demands posed by token holders. And the protocol itself, being on the execution layer, actually has no direct effect on what the validators can do on the consensus layer. So the concerns are valid. I think the overall estimated risk impact, especially as the protocol is now and as Ethereum currently works, is probably assessed a little bit higher than it should be. And there are a lot of things happening within the Lido protocol in terms of potentially new modules that are being developed to allow a larger swath of operators to join, both permissioned and permissionless, as well as improvements being made on the governance side to give stakers like veto power over decisions that the DAO might make that might not be in the interest of stakers or of the network. So if you take all of those things in consideration and also consider the fact that Ethereum is like a moving target, there are a lot of upgrades coming to Ethereum that all liquid staking protocols will have to adapt to, and a lot of those upgrades are not even finalized as a design or a thought yet. One of like the biggest kind of like issues or difficulties is figuring out the right way to walk that tightrope in between where the risk is now, how to mitigate that risk to the fullest extent, and where do you want to end up in a couple of years from now.
I don't know if you have anything to add, Mara. It's okay if not.
I'll let Izzy take this one.
Yeah. So then the other thing I wanted to cover is, there's so many liquid staking protocols. Some that have been in the market for a while, a lot that have come to the market recently. Why has no one been able to challenge Lido's dominance? And Izzy, I'd love for you to touch on that. And I'll preface this by saying, like, I'm very much in the camp of, like, when people ask Lido to self-limit or they ask Lido to do this or do that, I'm in very much the camp of, like, the only way that you can, if you think it's a problem, the only way that you can fix a problem is through competition. And so why hasn't the competition been more thorough?
So there's probably a bunch of different factors that affect this, right? There are early mover advantages. I mean, there's a bit of revisionist history that goes around that Lido was the first mover in the space. This is absolutely not true. Lido not only launched after a few other liquid staking protocols, but its kind of like ascent in the early days of liquid staking was slower than those protocols. It was, I guess, fortunate enough to not suffer some of the fates that those protocols had that had to do with things like mass slashings, misconfigurations, or like I don't want to say cut corners exactly, but things that if they weren't missed or if they had been properly reviewed would not have like ended up in that outcome. So I think it's a combination of being in the right place at the right time, assessing the needs of the market in an appropriate way to deliver a scalable liquid staking solution in the sense that it met enough of the demand to displace the current threat at the time, which was large centralized exchanges picking up all of that stake and essentially running it completely by themselves. So like before Lido entered the foray, there was like 2 or 3 exchanges essentially running like over, I think, 40% at that time of Ethereum staked ETH. And then slowly that diminished over time, and a lot of that stake like migrated towards liquid staking tokens. The second thing that I would say is like a fervent commitment, not only to the values of Ethereum. Now, a lot of people like disagree with this, but it's up to everyone to decide on their own what they think the values of Ethereum are and how they see their own projects or the tools that they use in alignment with those values. And the third thing is like a commitment to excellence and almost paranoia about things like security. So just to give an example, Lido v2, an upgrade of the protocol, was rolled out in May. And there were over 7 audits done, I think amounting to like over $800,000 in terms of costs on different pieces of this protocol. It included things that are at the forefront of security reviews like formal verification, and even things like anticipating whether there might be compiler bugs in the languages that are being used to write the contracts, and writing tests to see if those compiler bugs would affect how the protocol runs or not. So there's not a lot of projects that execute like neither at that speed, nor at that excellence, nor at the rate that the users want. So the Chapelle upgrade of Ethereum was mid-April. The Lido v2 upgrade was mid-May, and it was the first fully fledged liquid staking token to offer like real robust withdrawals for users. So at some point, somebody unstaked like 400,000 ST-ETH, and they got it within 3 days. There's no other protocol that can do that.
Yeah, that has been super impressive. I remember that withdrawal. I was like, oh, it seems like a lot, and then it just worked.
It just worked, right? And that's the thing. It just works.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think that not only has Lido done an incredible job, but I also think that you guys are like really true to Ethereum values. However they define them, like in the way that I define them, I think you guys have been doing a great job. Although I still don't like 33%. I'll be clear. But with that, Mara, the CEO of Alluvial. Alluvial is a liquid staking protocol that is trying to provide that competitor challenge that is market dynamic. And what I'd love to do is, Mara, I'd love to kind of hear from you about why you think, having seen all the approaches of all their liquid staking solutions, why is Alluvial designed the way that it is, and how are you trying to really present this alternative to Lido?
For sure. I think we've touched on a lot of really interesting points, and definitely, as mentioned before, I think one of the biggest questions is where is the market today? Where are we seeing adoption, and where is it going to be tomorrow? I've worked in the staking space for a lot of years now, and so I've seen, kind of the movement of the market from, slow on-ramp on the institutional side to now I think a more viable path to seeing, large-scale adoption across institutional and enterprise players. And I think that's probably the biggest differentiating point, or the way to think about this. We're going to need different products in the market that are going to meet the needs of those customer segments. If you're an enterprise today or a regulated institution, there are things that are going to be critical for you. You're going to look at solutions and the way that they meet your compliance needs. You're going to be very conscious about counterparty risk, understanding which node operators or vendors are inside of these different solutions. And you're really going to care about making sure that, whatever solution you implement has the right commercial model, right? Having come out of Coinbase, I obviously saw a lot of some of these considerations from, internal to the business, but also across other exchanges or custodians that were starting to think about the market. And really the question was very similar to what Izzy said earlier, which is how can we build for a diversified infrastructure, sort of avoiding this centralizing force that, single companies, centralized organizations may have, and how can we build a standard or baseline that can actually meet the institutional and enterprise grade needs that these businesses have, and that is actually what we're trying to solve for. And so we have a atypical origin story. We actually, built the business with support of early partners, including Coinbase, Kraken, Figment. Today we have over 7 integrations with leading MPC providers, exchanges, and custodians that are opting into this type of architecture. And I think that is truthfully, the way that we think about the market, which is how can we get, the Robin Hoods of the world, to start using products and offering that to their customers? How can we think about, activating the structured product providers in the market that are looking for solutions that meet their needs? And I think, we're positioned to support that as the market continues to evolve and grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that just in general, one kind of way of viewing the world that I think about a lot is how the mixture of asset ownership continues to move from total self-custody. If we assume that it was 100% self-custody. It was just, Satoshi with his initial 50 Bitcoin from the very first block, to more and more we're going to get our, parents and grandparents and everybody to have crypto, but like they're going to be using it through, whether it's Coinbase or JP Morgan or whatever. So it'll still be a lot of individual ownership just within this kind of like institutional, framework. And so enabling those people to stake and stake the right way, I think is different from what anybody else has really tried to go after. One thing I'd love to cover, so we only have about 5 minutes. I'd love to hear about, there's a lot of middlewares that are up and around. A lot of them are very exciting. I'd love to hear from you guys, one, if you could, I'll define middleware, and then I'd love to hear from you guys kind of like, which ones are you most excited about? But specifically, which ones are you most excited about from the liquid staking perspective, whether it enables you to save money or have greater security or more offerings or services or whatever it is. And for the audience, middlewares are just additional infrastructure that validators can run that enable them to do different work or enable them to behave differently. And so, for example, there's something like Obol, which allows you to take a validator key and split it, and then you have, let's say, essentially kind of like almost like a multi-sig for controlling the validator in a sense. You have things like flashbots that allow them to do MEV activities and so on. And so yeah, would love to pass it over to you guys. Which middlewares are you most hyped for?
Yeah, so from my perspective at least, because I mostly deal with stuff like node operations, the middleware that I think is the most interesting and the most poised to change like the staking landscape on Ethereum is things related to distributed validator technology. So like you mentioned earlier, like Obol network and SSV network, because they do a couple of different things. So they reduce technical risk. If you have, let's say, a multi-sig controlling a validator, the risk that the validator goes off by itself is greatly reduced, because essentially if the multi-sig is 4 people, you need at least 2 people to go offline for this validator as a whole in aggregate to go offline. So you're spreading operational risk. And so there's an interesting model where even an operator by themselves might choose to run this validator in a distributed fashion to reduce operational risk. You add a little bit of like operational complexity and maybe latency perhaps, but actually the feedback and the performance that we're seeing so far from both testnet and mainnet tests is that latency, or at least performance, can even be better because it's not so often for that crucial amount of like operators within the cluster to go offline. The second thing is that it allows multiple people to run nodes together. And this enfranchises the addition of new node operators, like net new node operators into the Ethereum ecosystem. So people that previously maybe didn't have the technical chops to run a validator completely by themselves, or if they live in a place that doesn't have consistent internet or electricity, can run a validator together with somebody else, like their family or their friends or somebody across on the internet, that they met like on playing EVE Online. We had the CEO of CCP here earlier. And run a validator together and share the rewards, and also share like the business operations of running that without the fear that if they go offline because they're like on a holiday in Greece or whatever and their modem cuts out, their validator stops working. And the third thing is that it allows for changing of the risk mechanics within liquid staking protocols in a way that also introduces net new node operators into the mix. So when you think about permissionless staking on the Ethereum network in general, what you do is you require some sort of bond from the operator to ensure against either bad performance or malicious behavior. These bonds are currently quite high, between like 4 to 8 ETH, depending on, or even 16 ETH, depending on the liquid staking protocol. And so if you can run a validator in a shared capacity, and it's much more difficult for that validator to go offline, you can more than linearly reduce the actual bond that would be needed, and so you can get even more operators that previously didn't have the capital required to participate, and enable them to participate. So like all of that stuff just means more people running more nodes on Ethereum, and that's the best thing that can happen for the network.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll biasly second that, just given my involvement with the projects. But yeah, it's really interesting when you kind of think about our market, and particularly the folks that we work with who are, I would say, probably the most conservative on the risk scale. Any type of security innovation is obviously extremely interesting. DBT in many ways is an insurance product, right? It reduces the cost that you need in order to put up capital to provide principal protection, right? If you think about it that way. Having threshold configurations across different validators just provides more safety. In many ways, you can think of it as a way to create active-active configurations. And so if a node goes down and you have the right threshold, nothing actually happens to the core stake. And I think it actually will probably be a requirement to see that in the market, especially as we think about, scaling this to levels where we can really support the market at scale and ensure we have the right security and risk protection in place to make sure that, assets are safe and customers, feel good about that, and so do the providers that support them.
Amazing. Well, we're almost out of time. So to close out, where can people stake with you, and where they can go? Where can they go to get more information?
www.lido.fi, and that has all the information as well. One of the really interesting things to check out on Lido is the forums. There's a lot of really, really cool research and analysis that happens there, from everything around like the censorship resistance of Ethereum to how node operators are selected.
Awesome. Yeah, you can head to our website, alluvial.finance, so ALLUVIAL. You can also, link out to the Liquid Collective protocol from there. Today, you have access to stake ETH and, issue LS ETH, which is our receipt token across Coinbase, Figment, Hashnode, Bitcoin Swiss, a couple of other providers. So we're super duper excited to continue expanding access for all participants and across different geographies.
Amazing. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.